He thought he was just helping a stranger fix her car, but the woman in tears was a billionaire bride running from a wedding she didn't want. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Snowflakes drifted like feathers across the windshield as Michael Turner eased his rusted sedan onto the shoulder of Route 9. The morning had been rough already. Emily's boots had gone missing again. The heater in the shop had wheezed itself to death overnight, and he was running on fumes in every sense of the word. But it wasn't the cold or the stress that made him stop. It was the glint of hazard lights blinking through the fog like a heartbeat, slow, steady, stranded. And then he saw her. The car was something out of a magazine, sleek, white, foreign, the kind of thing that didn't belong anywhere near Maple Hollow. Its curves gleamed even through the dirt-speckled frost, but it was the figure behind the wheel that pulled him in. A woman sat hunched over, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, shoulders trembling. She wasn't just stranded, she was crying. Michael pulled up behind her, shifted into park, and threw on his hazards. "Stay in the car, Em," he said gently. Emily, nestled in the back seat with her backpack half-zipped, gave a sleepy nod. He stepped out, boots crunching against the icy gravel, and walked slowly toward the car. Up close, the frost on the windows was melting from within. Fogged by breath, by panic. He tapped gently on the driver's side glass. The woman flinched, then turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged, but she still looked striking. Not in a glamorous way, but in that way people look when they've lost something important and haven't told anyone yet. She hesitated, then rolled the window down a few inches. "Need some help?" Michael asked, voice calm, steady, like he did this every day. She didn't answer at first, then, after a breath that looked like it hurt, she said, "It just stopped. I don't know what's wrong. I can't call anyone right now." He nodded like he understood because, somehow, he did. "All right," he said. "Let me take a look." She moved over without another word, and just like that, without knowing who she was or where she came from, Michael did what he always did. He helped. Michael popped the hood with a practiced flick of his hand, the metal creaking in protest as steam hissed upward like a secret trying to escape. The engine beneath was pristine, too pristine. Nothing like the dusty old Chevys and rust-bitten Fords he was used to coaxing back to life. He leaned in, fingers grazing the cold metal, searching for the problem, though his mind kept drifting back to her face. She stood behind him now, arms crossed, coat clutched too tightly around her body as if trying to hold herself together. Her boots were expensive, her nails were manicured but chipped. And that coat, it looked like something straight off a runway, but was wrinkled and slightly stained near the hem, like she'd been running through mud, or worse. But what really caught him was the way she stared at the trees lining the road, like she was expecting someone to follow her out of them. "You get it looked at recently?" he asked, keeping his tone easy. She blinked, pulled herself back to the moment. "Yes, yesterday, actually. Everything was fine." Then softer. "At least the car was." He nodded, noting the signs of a blown fuse, or maybe a bad battery connection. Simple fixes. But nothing about this felt simple. There was something behind her eyes, something that didn't match the icy air or the quiet of the road. She was too polished for this town, too put together, even with mascara smudged under her eyes. He wasn't the type to pry. Michael knew what it was like to carry stories you weren't ready to tell, but her silence was louder than most people's shouting. "I can get it running," he said. "Just needs a little love. You're lucky it died here and not out on the main road." She offered a weak smile. "I don't feel very lucky." Michael straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, not caring that he was leaving oil stains. "Well, you got me instead of a tow truck that would have charged you $300 just to show up. That's something." For a moment, her expression cracked, just slightly. And beneath all the expensive fabric and poise, he saw it. Fear, exhaustion, and something else he couldn't name yet. She wasn't just lost. She was running. The wind picked up, brushing icy tendrils through the trees as Michael leaned back into the engine, securing the clamp with a quiet grunt. Everything about the car was high-end, German-engineered precision, polished chrome finishes, a battery compartment cleaner than his shop floor. But it wasn't the car that had his attention now. As he moved to the side to check a connection near the alternator, his eyes caught something unusual, barely visible under the edge of her unbuttoned coat. Delicate ivory lace, intricate and unmistakably bridal, peeked from beneath the tailored wool. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Not a blouse, not something casual. This wasn't just a woman in expensive clothes. She was wearing a wedding dress. He didn't say anything, just closed the hood slowly and stepped back, wiping his hands on a cloth as his mind tried to catch up with what his eyes had just confirmed. The silence between them felt heavier now. She stood a few feet away, rubbing her arms for warmth, coat clutched tighter, but not tight enough to hide the shimmer of the satin lining underneath. Her boots were muddy, her eyes still glassy, and her hands bare. No ring, no band, not even the faint tan line where one might have been. "Engine should be fine now," he said quietly. "Just a short in the wiring harness. Must have knocked loose when you hit that pothole back there." She nodded, but her gaze had drifted, over his shoulder, into the trees, as if listening for footsteps that hadn't caught up yet. "You heading somewhere?" he asked, tone deliberately casual. "Just away," she said, and then she caught his gaze. She saw it in his eyes, the fact that he'd noticed, the lace, the missing ring, the unspoken truth between them. But Michael didn't press. He didn't need to. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't his business, not unless she made it so. He gestured toward the car. "Try starting it." She walked past him, and for a split second her coat slipped open just enough to show the tear along the side of her dress, ripped fabric, as if someone had grabbed her and she'd yanked herself free. The engine roared to life. But her silence roared louder. The engine settled into a smooth purr beneath the hood, and Michael stepped back, satisfied that the issue was handled. His fingers were numb from the cold, blackened with grease and grit, but he didn't notice. His focus stayed on her, on the woman standing a few feet away with her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if holding herself together took more effort than standing upright. She hadn't asked for much, and he hadn't offered more than what she seemed ready to accept. That was fine with him. He handed her a clean rag from the passenger seat of his car. She took it with a quiet thanks and dabbed at her cheeks, careful not to smear what was left of her makeup. He didn't ask why she was out here alone in a wedding dress, or where she was going, or who she had left behind. He'd seen that look before, in war vets who'd returned to town too quiet for their age, in single mothers who paid him with wrinkled dollars and a guilty smile, in himself, in the mirror, after Grace had died. Everyone had a line they weren't ready to cross. Hers was right in front of her lips. "You're good to go," he said, nodding toward the car. "But if it gives you trouble again, don't keep driving. Let it cool off and call for help." She offered a tight nod, but didn't move. Her eyes lingered on him like she was trying to decide something, whether he was safe, whether she should say more. But she didn't, and he didn't push. "You need anything else?" he asked, voice even. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, thank you." "Don't mention it." Still, she didn't get in the car. She stood there for a moment longer, as if anchoring herself in his presence, even if just briefly. As if she needed someone to treat her like a person, not a scandal, not a name on a guest list, not a headline waiting to break. Then she got in, shut the door gently, and adjusted the mirror. Michael stepped back, hands in his jacket pockets, watching as the car pulled away into the misty road. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Some stories don't need to be told right away. Some people just need a little silence to remember who they are. The white car was already parked in front of Rosy's diner when Michael arrived 20 minutes later. He'd barely made it through the shop's front gate when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please let me thank you." "Breakfast?" I saw the sign for Rosy's down the road. He wasn't sure how she got his number. Maybe Emily had passed it along without asking. But he wasn't the type to turn down kindness, especially not when it was offered so genuinely. He wiped his hands clean and changed his shirt, trying to brush the morning's grease off his jeans with little success. Rosy's was half full, mostly locals grabbing their usual orders: fishermen, factory workers, and 2 retired ladies who spent more time chatting than eating. The moment Michael pushed open the glass door, the bell overhead jingled and every head inside turned. And then they saw her. She sat in a corner booth facing the window with a steaming mug of coffee cupped between her hands. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her coat draped over the seat beside her, revealing the pale silk bodice of her torn wedding dress beneath a borrowed hoodie someone must have lent her. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, and for the first time that day, something about her looked steady. Michael slid into the booth opposite her, nodding to the waitress, who appeared instantly with a fresh cup. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said, wrapping his hands around the warmth of the mug. "I figured you'd say no if I asked to pay you," she said, lips curling into the faintest smile. "So I thought I'd bribe you with eggs and pancakes." He chuckled softly. "You're not wrong." A couple seated at the counter leaned over to whisper, glancing their way. Whispers multiplied. Not because people knew who she was, but because she didn't look like she belonged. Not in Maple Hollow, not in a diner where the most exotic dish was blueberry syrup. But Michael didn't flinch. He just sipped his coffee like it was any other Tuesday, sitting across from a woman in lace and silk who looked like she had just stepped out of another world, and maybe wanted to leave it behind. "You got a name?" he asked casually. She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Clare." He nodded slowly. "Well, Clare, welcome to Rosy's." Michael didn't press the issue when she said her name was Clare. The way she said it, quick, careful, like a test balloon, told him everything he needed to know. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the version of herself she was offering, and that was enough for now. Clare stirred her coffee slowly, eyes following the swirl of cream like it might reveal an answer. She asked nothing about his life, though her gaze lingered a little too long when he mentioned Emily, as if the idea of family, of something real, was a foreign language she once knew but had forgotten how to speak. The waitress, a sharp-eyed woman named Sherry, came over with 2 plates of pancakes and a raised eyebrow. "You new in town?" she asked Clare, a little too sweet. "Just passing through," Clare replied, her smile polite but clipped. "Well, welcome to Rosy's," Sherry said with a wink, but as she walked off, Michael noticed the subtle way she leaned into the kitchen to whisper something. That was the thing about small towns. News traveled faster than sound. Clare reached for the syrup, pausing when she saw the smudge of ink on her finger. She tried to wipe it clean with a napkin, but the ink smeared, leaving a dark mark across her knuckle. Michael knew that look, the sudden self-awareness, the instinct to vanish into the background. He recognized it because he'd worn it once himself in the months after Grace died, when he wasn't sure how to exist without someone else to keep him grounded. "I don't know what people are saying about me right now," she said quietly, eyes still on her hands. Michael leaned back in his seat. "They aren't saying anything. They don't know who you are." She looked up at him, surprised. "I'm guessing that's the way you want it." Clare didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. For now. Outside, a truck rolled by, its tires sloshing through slush. Inside, the silence stretched comfortably between them. Whatever her real name was, whatever life she'd fled, it could wait. Here, in this booth, she was just Clare. And Michael wasn't about to take that away from her. The diner bell chimed again, and this time it was Emily bursting through the door, her pink backpack bouncing with every step and her cheeks flushed from the cold. Michael had texted her sitter to bring her by after school, figuring a hot chocolate and her favorite stack of waffles might brighten the end of a long day. What he hadn't anticipated was how fast she would zero in on Clare. Clare looked up from her coffee just as Emily raced toward their booth. "Daddy," she grinned, climbing up beside him without hesitation. Her eyes flicked to the woman sitting across the table, and curiosity bloomed like a switch being flipped. Clare smiled gently, folding her hands on the table. "Hi, Emily." "You remembered my name," Emily said, delighted. "Do you like waffles? They have blueberry ones here. I always get blueberry." Clare nodded, her expression softening. "I do. Blueberries are my favorite. Are you Daddy's friend now?" Michael chuckled into his coffee but said nothing. Clare blinked. "I guess so." Emily tilted her head, examining her like a puzzle. "You look like someone from a movie." "Is that a good thing?" Clare asked, amused. "I think so," Emily replied. "But your dress is funny. It's too fancy for pancakes." Clare's eyes dropped to the torn lace, peeking from under her hoodie, and something flickered across her face, something between sadness and surprise. "I didn't have time to change," she said, her voice low. Emily nodded like that made perfect sense. "Were you in a wedding?" Michael tensed beside her, but Clare only smiled faintly. "I was supposed to be." Emily's brows furrowed. What happened? Did they cancel it like in cartoons? Clare looked down at her hands. "Something like that." Emily mercifully moved on. "You can sit with us. I don't mind, and if you don't have a house, you can stay in our spare room. Daddy lets people stay if they're nice." Clare blinked fast, her smile faltering. "That's very kind of you." Michael placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, grounding the moment. But Clare looked away, blinking again, as if a 7-year-old's open heart had cracked something inside her that years of polished armor never could. The rain came fast, one of those sudden spring storms that darkened the sky without warning. By the time Michael pulled out of Rosy's diner with Emily in the back seat, and Clare riding quietly up front, the wipers were working overtime, slashing across the windshield in nervous sweeps. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, a slow growl that matched the tension pressing in from all sides. Clare stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Raindrops streaked down like tears she hadn't let fall yet. She hadn't said much since breakfast. Emily had dozed off in the back, wrapped in her jacket like a cocoon, and Michael hadn't tried to fill the silence. Some silences were meant to be sat in. He turned onto a gravel road that led toward the edge of town, the tires crunching, as he slowed near the small cabin that served as home. The rain made it look even smaller, cozier somehow, like a shelter from something bigger than weather. As he parked, the storm picked up, drumming hard against the roof. "We'll wait a minute before running in," he said, "unless you're up for a mad dash." Clare gave a soft, humorless laugh. "I've done enough running lately." Michael glanced over, waiting. She didn't look at him when she spoke next. "I was supposed to get married yesterday, or today. Honestly, I'm not even sure anymore." He said nothing, just listened. "I didn't love him," she continued, her voice quiet but steady. "But love wasn't the point. It was about names, legacy, deals between families. I was a pawn, and I was tired of pretending to be grateful for it." The words hung heavy in the air, soaking in like the rain outside. "I didn't know where I was going," she added, finally looking at him. "I just got in the car and drove. I didn't plan to stop. Not really." "You stopped," he said simply. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Because something told me I wouldn't be judged here." Michael leaned back against the seat, watching the rain smear the world into soft edges. "You weren't wrong." In that quiet, storm-wrapped moment, something shifted. Not a confession, not a full truth, but enough to matter, enough to begin. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it had grown heavier, relentless, as if the sky had decided to wring itself dry all at once. By the time Michael carried Emily into the house, her head nestled against his shoulder, Clare stood frozen on the porch, her coat dripping, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like armor. Michael unlocked the door and nudged it open with his foot. "Come on in," he said, flicking on the hallway light. The warm glow spilled out into the night like a welcome. Clare hesitated. She glanced back at her car, now a blur behind streaked windows. For a moment he thought she'd say no, that she'd thank him, get back behind the wheel, and vanish down the dark road, but she didn't. She stepped inside. The house was small, old but clean. The living room was cluttered in a lived-in way. Boots by the door, a stack of Emily's drawings on the coffee table, a half-built Lego castle in the corner. Clare looked around, taking in the snapshots of a quiet life she didn't recognize, a life not defined by status or headlines. Michael set Emily on the couch, pulled a blanket over her, and then turned to Clare. "I've got a spare room," he said, scratching the back of his neck like he was unsure it was the right thing to offer. "It's not fancy, just warm, dry." Clare's lips parted slightly like she wanted to object, but then she looked at Emily, curled under the blanket, safe, small, completely unburdened. Something softened in her. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." He led her down the narrow hallway to a room with faded wallpaper and a single bed covered in a worn but clean quilt. A lamp sat on a small dresser next to an old photo of Michael and Emily in front of a snowman, both of them smiling like they didn't know the world could hurt. "If you need anything, I'll be down the hall," he said, lingering in the doorway. Clare nodded, stepping in slowly, fingertips brushing the edge of the dresser like she needed to touch something real. Michael didn't ask any more questions, and Clare didn't offer any more truths. But in that small room, with the storm still raging outside, she took her first deep breath in days. And for one night at least, she let herself feel safe. The next morning came quietly. The storm had passed, leaving behind wet roads and a gray, dripping calm that hung over Maple Hollow like a heavy coat. Michael slipped out early, letting Emily sleep in and leaving Clare to the silence of the spare room. He figured he'd grab gas, maybe a coffee, and think through what came next, though he wasn't sure what that even meant yet. The bell above the gas station door jingled as he stepped inside. Cold air from the cooler section mixed with the smell of burnt coffee and motor oil. Walt, the owner, gave him a nod from behind the counter, already halfway through a crossword. Michael poured himself a cup of black coffee, added 1 sugar, then turned toward the rack of newspapers by the register. That's when he saw it. Her face. Large, centered, unmistakable. Clare Whitmore missing hours before society wedding. He froze, coffee halfway to his lips. The headline was splashed across every front page, her picture elegant and polished, a far cry from the woman who had stood on the side of the road in a soaked coat and smudged makeup. The article's subheading read like a movie pitch: "Heiress vanishes on wedding day." Fiancé claims no idea where she went. Family remains silent. There were mentions of wealth, speculation of scandal, even a hint at foul play. Michael stared at the paper longer than he meant to. "You see that?" Walt said, leaning over the counter. "Whole mess. Bet she just freaked out and skipped. Probably on a beach by now." Michael gave a non-committal grunt, folding the paper and placing it back on the rack. His stomach twisted. She hadn't mentioned a last name, hadn't needed to. But now he knew. Clare wasn't just someone running from a bad decision. She was Clare Whitmore, the Clare Whitmore, heiress to Whitmore Automotive, worth more than the entire county put together. He paid for the coffee, kept his expression steady, and stepped back into the morning mist. The whole world would be looking for her now. But last night, she hadn't wanted the world. She'd just wanted a room, a blanket, and someone who didn't ask for anything in return. Michael took a long sip, heart suddenly heavy. He had no idea what to do next, only that something in his quiet, worn-down life had just shifted, and there was no going back. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the kitchen by late morning. Michael had taken a chance and baked one of the frozen apple pies Emily loved, figuring the familiar scent might make the house feel less like a stranger's shelter and more like a place someone could breathe in. Clare sat at the small kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug that had #1 Dad peeling on the side, but she hadn't taken a sip. He could tell something had shifted in her overnight. The restlessness was sharper now, The way her eyes darted toward the window, how her foot tapped beneath the table like her nerves had taken over where sleep had failed. She hadn't said much all morning, but he could feel the tension building, and he knew it wasn't the coffee making her hands tremble. Finally, she spoke. "Did you go anywhere this morning?" Her voice was quiet, but tight, like a held breath. "Just the gas station," he said, setting 2 plates down, 1 slice of warm pie on each. "Figured you could use a sugar rush." Clare didn't move. Did you see anything? About me?" Michael sat across from her and took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "I saw the paper." Her shoulders tightened, her eyes locked on his face, scanning for judgment, questions, a shift in how he saw her. She didn't find any. He leaned forward and nudged the sugar toward her. "They got your good side in the photo." Clare blinked, stunned. "You're not going to ask why I left?" He shook his head. "I think I already know." She sat back in her chair, visibly shaken, hands clenched around the mug. "I can't go back," she whispered. "If they find me, they'll drag me right back to everything I walked away from." Michael stood, walked over to the counter and refilled her coffee without a word. Then he returned to his seat and looked at her gently. "Then they won't find you, not here." For a long moment, Clare stared at the dark liquid in her mug like it might dissolve the panic pooling in her chest. Outside, the sky was still overcast, but in that tiny kitchen, with the smell of apple pie and the silence of a man who didn't want anything from her, she let herself believe, if only for a second, that she might be safe. Michael was folding laundry when he found it. Clare's coat had been draped over the back of the couch all morning, the hem still damp from the night she arrived. He hadn't meant to go through her things, but Emily had knocked over her juice, and he'd grabbed the coat without thinking, intending to hang it by the door. The weight in the pocket caught him off guard. Too solid, too deliberate. His fingers brushed the small velvet box before he even realized what it was. A beat passed. Then another. He shouldn't look. He knew that. But curiosity has its own gravity, especially when wrapped in silence and lace, and a woman who's been running from a life she never wanted. He opened it gently. The diamond inside wasn't just big, it was unreal. Cold and glittering, set against platinum in a ring designed for spectacle, not sentiment. It didn't belong in this house. It didn't belong in Maple Hollow. It belonged in ballrooms, on fingers raised in champagne toasts, under spotlights and surveillance. Michael stared at it for a moment, the weight of its story louder than words. He thought about what it must have meant to her, what it symbolized, what she had walked away from. It wasn't just a ring. It was a cage disguised in brilliance. Quietly, reverently, he closed the box and slipped it back into the pocket. When Clare emerged a few minutes later, hair pulled back, eyes less restless than the night before, he didn't mention it, didn't flinch. He offered her a cup of tea like nothing had happened. She took it with a soft, "Thank you," her gaze lingering on his face a little longer than usual. Maybe she saw something in his expression. Maybe she noticed the way he looked at the coat and then away. But he didn't bring it up. He wasn't ready, and he sensed she wasn't either. Some things need to be carried until the person who dropped them is strong enough to pick them back up. So he waited. Not for the truth. Just for the moment she was ready to tell it. The old Dodge from down the street had coughed its way into Michael's driveway just after noon, the engine wheezing like a smoker in denial. Jim Harper, one of the town's few remaining WW2 veterans, had begged off fixing it himself. Arthritis didn't care much for loyalty, and neither did carburetors. Michael agreed to take a look. Clare was already out on the porch, sipping tea bundled in one of Emily's oversized hoodies and a pair of worn jeans someone had left in a donation box years ago. She looked nothing like the photo in the paper. She looked real. "You ever hold a socket wrench?" Michael asked, popping the hood and propping it with a stick. Clare raised a brow, smirking slightly. "Is that your way of asking for help or testing me?" He shrugged. "A little of both." To his surprise, she came over without hesitation, rolling up her sleeves and standing beside him like she belonged there. And oddly, she didn't look out of place. There was no arrogance in her movements. She watched, listened, asked questions, handed him tools with surprising accuracy. Her hands were too clean for the work, but her effort was pure. They worked in sync, her holding a flashlight steady, him elbow-deep in rust and oil. The occasional spark popped, the scent of gasoline rising as Michael tightened the last bolt. "You're good at this," she said, her voice low, thoughtful. "You're not bad at holding a light," he replied, glancing at her. "Better than most of the kids I've had in the shop." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My father would have hated this." Michael looked at her sideways. "Fixing something with your own hands?" "No, needing help." Her gaze dropped. "He taught me that needing anything was weakness." Michael leaned against the frame of the truck and watched her for a second longer than necessary. "You're here," he said. "You asked for nothing. That's not weakness." Clare met his eyes, and in that quiet space between busted engines and borrowed hoodies, something shifted. She was no longer the woman who just happened to break down on a cold road. She was someone he wanted to know. The barn behind Michael's house had long since stopped housing anything that needed feeding. The old stalls were dry and empty, the hayloft sagging but still holding together, and a few rusted tools lined the walls like forgotten artifacts. Michael kept it mostly for storage and quiet. On clear nights, he'd sit out there with a beer and let the silence settle in like an old friend. That afternoon he brought Clare with him. She didn't speak at first. She paced the dirt floor, trailing her fingers along the wooden beams, pausing now and then as if testing the memories this place might hold. Sunlight filtered through a broken window, casting slanted light across the dust that danced in the air. It felt like the kind of place where things could be said without echoing. "I used to pretend barns were castles," Clare said finally, settling onto an old crate. "When I was little, I'd wander off during the summer, find some run-down building on one of our properties, and build stories around it. Queens, knights, dragons, anything that wasn't my real life." Michael leaned against the opposite beam, arms crossed, waiting. "My father hated that," she continued. "He used to tell me, imagination is for people with no direction. He'd drag me back inside, clean the dirt from my hands, and remind me that I was a Whitmore, that I had expectations to uphold, a name to protect." She looked up, eyes clear but far away. "That's all I ever was to him, a name, a piece of the family brand. And marrying Daniel, that was the final move in the game, a merger dressed up as love." Michael didn't say a word, just listened, letting her voice fill the stillness. "He never asked me what I wanted. Not once," she said, her voice tightening. "He just assumed I'd play my part, smile for the cameras, cut the ribbon, wear the ring, be the asset he needed." A pause. "And I almost did it. I almost stood there in front of 100 people and gave myself away." She looked at him then, for real. But then the part of me that still remembered castles and dragons, she said no. Michael nodded once. "Good." They didn't speak for a while after that. The dust floated, the light shifted, and for the first time in years, Clare felt like maybe she didn't have to be anything but herself. The living room smelled like crayons and toast. Emily sat cross-legged on the carpet, tongue poking out in concentration as she colored in the last corner of her latest masterpiece. Papers were scattered across the floor, a rainbow trail of half-finished sketches and bold scribbles. Clare sat nearby on the couch, watching with quiet amusement as the little girl hummed to herself, completely absorbed in the moment. Michael was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, letting the sounds of home fill the space between them. The radio played softly in the background, an old country song about winding roads and second chances. Clare found herself listening harder than she meant to. "Done," Emily announced proudly, holding up the picture for approval. "Look!" Clare leaned forward as Emily bounded over, the drawing gripped in both hands. The paper was slightly wrinkled, the crayon strokes heavy in some spots, faint in others, but the image was unmistakable. 3 stick figures standing side by side, one tall with a wrench in hand, one small, smiling with curly hair, and one in a long dress, holding both their hands. Claire blinked. "That's me," Emily said, pointing to the smallest one, "and that's Daddy, and that's you." Claire stared at the figure in the dress. Her hair was drawn long, her eyes were bright blue, and above the trio, in big, shaky letters, Emily had written the word family. Something in Claire's chest pulled tight. "Do you like it?" Emily asked, bouncing on her heels. Claire swallowed, her voice soft. "I do, very much." Emily grinned, then darted off to hang it on the fridge, using 2 mismatched magnets to pin it in place like it was worth more than gold. Claire stayed seated, but her gaze didn't leave the paper. There was something disarming about the way Emily had drawn her, as if she belonged. No questions, no hesitations, just trust. Michael walked into the room, drying his hands, and followed her eyes to the fridge. "Pretty good likeness," he said. Claire didn't answer. She was too busy memorizing it. No one had ever drawn her like that before, not as a name or a bride or a business opportunity, just as someone worth holding on to. The night settled in slow and soft, wrapping the little house in a hush that made the ticking clock feel loud. Michael sat on the back porch, elbows resting on his knees, a half-empty mug of lukewarm coffee cradled in his hands. Claire had been quiet all evening, not distant, just inward. Like something was coiling, waiting to surface. She joined him without a word, settling into the chair beside his, her legs pulled up under her like she was trying to make herself smaller. They watched the trees sway in the breeze, their silhouettes swaying like ghosts against the silver-blue wash of moonlight. For a while neither of them spoke, and then Michael asked the question he'd been holding in his back pocket, waiting for the moment she might be strong enough to hear it out loud. "Why did you run?" Claire didn't flinch. She didn't deflect or stall. She just let out a slow breath, the kind that carried more weight than words, and looked straight ahead. "Because I couldn't do it," she said. Not one more fake smile, not one more speech about how perfect everything was. "I stood there, in the back of that cathedral, listening to a quartet play a song I didn't even pick, while my mother fussed with my veil like I was a doll, and I realized—" She paused, fingers tightening around her mug. "I realized the life they built for me wasn't mine. It was a stage set, beautiful and cold, and the moment I said I do, I'd be agreeing to disappear into it forever." Michael turned slightly toward her, his voice low. "You were going to marry someone you didn't love?" She nodded. "He's not a bad man. He's safe, chosen, strategic. My father called him a legacy alliance, like we were businesses, not people." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "I was raised to believe that love is optional. Appearances are not." Michael let her words hang between them like fog. "I didn't want to live a life where I had to hide everything real about myself just to keep the family brand intact," she said. "So I ran." She looked at him then, really looked, like she wanted to see what he thought, now that the truth was laid bare. But Michael didn't blink. "Good," he said simply. "Takes guts to choose your soul over your surname." And in that quiet, Claire felt something shift. For the first time, she wasn't ashamed of running. She was proud of it. The wind rustled through the trees behind the porch, carrying with it the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil and pine. The stars blinked faintly overhead, barely piercing the haze of the clouds, but it was quiet now, peaceful. Claire sat with her knees tucked to her chest, arms wrapped loosely around them, her gaze somewhere far off, but not entirely lost. Michael hadn't said much since her confession. He didn't have to. His silence wasn't judgment, it was space. The kind of space people didn't get often in her world. "I know what it looked like," she said, her voice soft, breaking the stillness between them. "Walking out on a wedding that probably cost more than most people's homes, cameras waiting, Paparazzi lined up like wolves. Michael didn't respond. He just waited. Claire drew in a breath. My mother was devastated. She kept telling me I was throwing away the life every girl dreams of, and maybe I was. The house, the name, the future that had been planned since I was old enough to be groomed for it. She paused, looking down at the mug in her hands. The tea had long gone cold, but she clutched it anyway, like it held something important. But I didn't want a perfect life, she said. I wanted a real one. Michael's eyes flicked to her. The moonlight brushed across her face just enough to catch the edge of her vulnerability. She wasn't performing. She wasn't explaining herself for sympathy or applause. She was just telling the truth. I wanted to wake up next to someone who didn't see me as a transaction. I wanted to laugh at stupid things and burn pancakes on Sunday mornings and fix things when they broke instead of throwing them away. Her voice cracked a little. She didn't apologize for it. I didn't want to be an accessory. I wanted to be a person. Michael leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, meeting her gaze. You ever think that maybe you just finally remembered what that feels like? Claire smiled then, tired but genuine. Yeah, I think I did. And under the stars, beneath the quiet sky of a town no one cared to look at on a map, she felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Home. It started with tire tracks, muddy and deep, carved into the roadside just outside of Maple Hollow. Then came the SUV, matte black and unfamiliar, parked near the old Sinclair Creek turnoff where Claire had first broken down. By noon, a second vehicle rolled in, this one with a long-lens camera pointed straight toward the horizon. And by evening, Michael knew someone had found her trail. He stood outside the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, watching the same car pass by for the third time in an hour. Not a local, not even trying to look like one, windows tinted, plates from out of state. They weren't here for an oil change. Inside the house, Claire stood by the window, arms folded, shoulders stiff. Her calm had been slowly unraveling all day, piece by piece, the weight of being found pressing on her like a vice. They found the car, she said, not looking at him. Michael gave a slow nod. Yeah, I figured. She turned then, eyes sharp with something between fear and resolve. They'll come here. They'll ask questions. You don't owe me anything, Michael. If this causes trouble for you or Emily... Stop, he said gently. You don't have to run again. Not yet. Claire hesitated, her mouth parted like she had more to say, but nothing came out. Instead, she pressed her hand to the windowsill and watched another car creep past the house, its brake lights flaring just a second too long. Michael stepped up beside her. Let them circle. Let them wonder. They don't know anything unless you give it to them. But they always find a way, she whispered. He didn't argue. He'd seen enough of the world to know that some storms couldn't be outrun, but you could ride them. You could decide where you'd stand when they broke. Outside, camera lenses turned, eyes searching through windshields and across fences, hungry for a glimpse of the heiress turned ghost. Inside, Michael poured 2 cups of coffee and set one quietly in front of her. Let the world rattle its cage. He wasn't letting her go without a fight. The next morning the sky hung low, thick with gray clouds that threatened another storm. Claire stood in the doorway, her coat already buttoned, her eyes scanning the horizon like it was a finish line. Her suitcase, small, beaten, far too modest for someone who once lived in penthouses, rested beside her boots. Emily's drawing still hung on the fridge behind her, the word family scrawled in bright purple crayon. Michael stood in the kitchen, drying a dish that had been dry for 5 minutes. He wasn't looking at her, but he felt her silence like a change in pressure. She hadn't said the words yet, but she would. I think I should go, Claire said finally. He looked up. Her voice was even, but there was something trembling underneath it. She wasn't panicked. She was preparing for goodbye, for cameras, for the return to the life she'd barely escaped. It's getting harder to keep them away, she added. If they get one photo of me here, They'll pull you into it. Emily, too." Michael nodded slowly. He walked over and set the dish down, hands resting on the edge of the counter. "I figured this might come," he said. Clare watched him, waiting. For protest, for a plea, for something to anchor her here. But he didn't give it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned against the counter and let the quiet stretch between them. "I never expected you to stay," he said. "I don't expect anything." She flinched a little, but he saw the relief, too, the freedom in not being needed to fill anyone's empty spaces, but also the ache of not being asked to. "I don't want to go back to that life," she admitted, "but I don't know how to live another one. Not really." He stepped closer, careful. "You don't have to know yet. You just have to want to try." Claire's hand tightened on the handle of her suitcase. She looked toward the door again, then back to him. "But you won't ask me to stay?" Michael shook his head. "You've had enough people trying to make your choices for you." She nodded slowly, jaw clenched, eyes wet, but defiant. Then quietly, she opened the door. But she didn't step through it. Not yet. The house was quiet when Michael woke up, too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't just mean someone was asleep, but that someone was gone. He stepped into the kitchen barefoot, the early light slanting through the windows in pale gold streaks. The coffee pot was still full. The chair where Clare usually sat was pushed in neatly. Her borrowed hoodie was folded on the arm of the couch. No shoes by the door, no suitcase, no car in the driveway, just a note. It lay flat on the table, a single sheet torn from Emily's drawing pad. No envelope, no flourish, just plain ink in small, careful handwriting. "Thank you for giving me one honest day." Michael stood there for a moment unmoving. He read the words once, then again. And then he didn't read them anymore, he just felt them. She hadn't said goodbye, she hadn't left a number or a plan or even a name, just that sentence, just that truth. He sank slowly into the chair she'd sat in the night before, running a hand over his face. The ache in his chest wasn't sharp, it was dull, settled deep, the kind of weight that didn't go away quickly. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen it in her eyes the night before, the pull of guilt, the echo of fear, the quiet calculation of how much she might ruin by staying. She'd done what she thought was right. He glanced over at the fridge. Emily's drawing still hung there, the three of them holding hands, the word family scrawled above. He considered taking it down, but instead he smoothed the edges and left it exactly where it was, because maybe Clare had left, but so had the version of her that lived for appearances and silence. And maybe, just maybe, what they'd built in that short time wasn't over, just paused. For now, he folded the note, slipped it into his wallet, and poured himself a cup of the coffee she hadn't touched. One honest day. He hadn't realized how much it meant, until she was gone. The days returned, as they always did. Morning light filtered through the blinds in familiar slats, Emily's laughter echoed from the hallway, and the coffee brewed at the same time it always had. Michael went back to work at the garage, back to wiping grease off old engines, back to tuning up tractors and pickup trucks that coughed through life like they were too stubborn to die. But everything was off by half a degree. Clare's absence wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself in grand, cinematic ways. It lived in the silence between moments, the second mug he no longer filled, the hoodie still folded on the armrest, untouched. It lived in Emily's drawings, which now included just 2 figures instead of 3. And it lived in Michael's chest, a slow pull that tightened a little each time he walked into the kitchen and didn't see her at the table. He didn't talk about it. Not to Emily, not to anyone in town. Maple Hollow wasn't the kind of place where people pried, but they noticed. The woman with the fancy car had vanished. Some assumed she'd been a cousin from out of state. Others whispered about trouble, but no one really asked Michael directly because the way he carried himself now, quieter, more thoughtful, said enough. He tried to keep his hands busy, rebuilt the carburetor on the Harper boys' dirt bike, fixed a faulty alternator on Mrs. Langley's minivan. But it was like patching a leaky roof with thumbtacks, functional, temporary, always waiting for the storm. At night, after Emily was asleep, he'd sit on the back porch with a beer, stare at the stars, and replay the short, bright flicker of days when she'd been here. The way she held a wrench, like she meant it. The way she listened without interruption. The way her guard fell when she thought no one was watching. Routine had returned. But it wasn't the same, because now he knew what it felt like to have someone see him, and to see someone truly in return. And once you've had that, the silence doesn't just feel empty. It feels like something's missing. Somewhere far from Maple Hollow, beneath chandeliers, inside boardrooms, and behind the cold walls of gated estates, Clare Whitmore made her decision public. The statement was brief, precise, almost surgical. After much reflection, I have decided not to proceed with the wedding previously planned between myself and Daniel March. I wish him all the best. This is a personal decision, and I ask for privacy as I move forward in a new direction with my life. But there was no privacy. The press erupted. News outlets ran with it like wildfire, pairing her calm statement with headlines that screamed scandal. Billionaire bride walks away from fairy tale wedding. Runaway heiress speaks at last. Whitmore dynasty in chaos as daughter refuses strategic union. Cameras camped outside the Whitmore family estate. Pundits speculated about prenups, about inheritance, about hidden motives. The stock price of Whitmore Automotive dipped 0.5 point, not because the company had changed, but because the woman who bore its name had finally said no to a script she never wrote. And behind the scenes, her family seethed. Her father, Vincent Whitmore, issued no public comment, but Clare knew what silence from a man like him meant. It was louder than fury. It was control slipping. It was a mask cracking. Her mother called once, just once. "You could have at least pretended for the photographs," she said, voice brittle. "You think the world forgives a woman who walks away from power?" Clare had answered with calm certainty, "I don't want their forgiveness. I want my life." Then she hung up, and just like that, the world that had always owned her, her image, her time, her choices, was no longer welcome to any of it. She'd traded a diamond worth $500,000 for the smell of motor oil and laughter over cheap pancakes. And while the world screamed betrayal and chaos, Clare, for the first time in her life, felt something else entirely. Freedom. It was tucked between the pages of an old service manual, one Michael hadn't touched in weeks. He found it on a Tuesday, just after closing up the shop, when the late afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows and painted everything in gold and dust. He wasn't looking for anything, just killing time, flipping pages out of habit. But there it was, an envelope. No name, no return address, just his. Inside a check, blank. Not unsigned, just blank. The line for the amount was untouched, so was the memo. But Clare had signed it in smooth, elegant ink, her signature confident, sharp. It was the kind of check someone with power leaves behind when they want to ease their conscience, or maybe buy silence. Michael stared at it for a long moment, not out of temptation, but out of something harder to name. Anger, maybe, sadness, disappointment, not at her. At what the world had trained her to believe people wanted from her. What she thought he might expect. He held it up to the light. It shimmered slightly, perfect, cold. And then he tore it, slow, steady, straight down the middle. Then once more, he dropped the pieces into the trash, wiped his hands on his jeans, and leaned against the workbench, staring at the spot where the envelope had been, like it had spoken to him. Maybe it had. She hadn't meant it as payment, he knew that. She wasn't that kind of person anymore. Not the woman who'd slept under his roof, helped him fix a rusted-out truck, and listened to Emily talk about dinosaurs and bedtime stories. But she'd still left it, which meant part of her still wasn't sure she could be loved without conditions. Michael glanced at the open garage door where the wind stirred the gravel and a few leaves danced across the floor. He didn't need her money, he just wanted her to come back, not with a check, but with the truth. The television in the corner of Rosy's diner was old, with a soft hum and a flickering corner that no one had ever bothered to fix. Most days it played local news or weather, background noise behind the clink of coffee mugs and conversations about harvests and high school baseball. But today the entire diner had gone quiet. Claire's face filled the screen. She was dressed in a tailored coat, standing at a podium, reporters shouting questions over one another as flashes lit up the frame. The caption below read, "Clare Whitmore speaks out. I chose my life." Next to it, a smaller line in bold, "Runaway bride or rebellious heiress." Michael had just set Emily's hot chocolate down when he saw her looking up, eyes wide, marshmallow halfway to her mouth. "Daddy, that's Clare." Michael froze. He turned slowly, catching her expression, confused, curious, not yet shaped by the way the world spins a story before it hears the truth. The camera cut to old footage, her engagement party, smiling beside a man in a tux, lavish decor. Helicopters overhead, the kind of world that never touched Maple Hollow. "Why are they calling her a runaway?" Emily asked. Michael sat down beside her, his voice calm but careful. "Because she left a wedding she didn't want." Emily furrowed her brow. "But people are allowed to do that, right?" He smiled faintly. "They should be." Emily turned back to the screen, watching Clare hold her composure in front of a sea of flashing lights. But her eyes weren't the same as the woman who had drawn with her on the living room floor or helped her make blueberry pancakes with too much batter. They were harder now, guarded. "Are they mad at her?" she asked softly. "Some of them, yeah. But she didn't do anything bad." "No," Michael said, resting a hand on her back. "She did something brave. And sometimes people don't like brave." Emily sat with that, then nodded. "I miss her." He did too. But he didn't say it out loud, because right now all he could do was watch the girl from the headlines and wonder if somewhere behind that polished armor Clare was missing them just as much. The first sign was the familiar sound of tires crunching over gravel, then the low hum of an engine, smooth, steady, not hurried. Michael didn't look up right away. He was under the hood of a pickup that hadn't run properly since '92, hands stained with oil and mind half-focused on the ticking engine block. But something about the stillness that followed made him straighten. When he turned, she was already out of the car. No paparazzi, no entourage, no headlines chasing her heels, just Clare. She wore jeans this time, a simple black sweater. Her hair was down, wind-blown from the ride. No makeup, no press-ready smile, just her. The version of her he remembered from quiet mornings and porch confessions, the one who didn't ask for permission to be herself. Michael stepped out from under the hood, wiping his hands on a rag as she approached. Her steps were cautious but certain, like someone returning to a place that had never fully left her heart. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said, voice calm but edged with nerves. "You came," he replied. A beat passed. Then another. "I'm not running anymore," she added. "Not from them, not from myself." He nodded slowly. "Good." Clare glanced around, the familiar gravel lot, the crooked mailbox, the rusted signs swinging in the wind that still said Turner Auto. Her gaze lingered on it for a moment like it was a compass. "I don't have a plan," she said quietly. "No 5-year vision, no mapped-out future, just a feeling that I need to start where I was, last honest." Michael didn't move. He didn't say the words she might have expected, no dramatic embrace, no sweeping declarations. Just the steadiness she'd always found in him. "You hungry?" he asked finally. Claire smiled, the kind that started in her eyes. "Yeah, I am." He turned toward the house without a word, holding the door open behind him, and just like that, Clare Whitmore returned to Maplewood, not to finish a story, but to begin a new one she chose, one that felt real. The old Turner Auto Garage had always been a one-man kind of place. One bay, one lift, one set of tools for every job under the sun. The concrete was cracked in places, the siding faded by years of sun and storms, and the heater only worked if you kicked it twice and prayed. But it was steady, honest. It was Michael's, which made the new construction stand out all the more. The second bay went up quietly, without ceremony. A few local contractors, a load of reclaimed wood, a couple curious neighbors who drove by slow, squinting, wondering if the world was shifting just a little off-axis. Michael didn't explain much, and Clare never made it about her. She wrote the check, oversaw the permits, delivered hot coffee to the crew at dawn, and helped carry lumber even when they told her not to. But she never once asked to put her name on it. No sign, no plaque, no photo op. She wasn't trying to brand anything. She was just trying to build something. Michael watched the new bay rise with quiet gratitude, half in awe, half in disbelief. Not at the money, he didn't care about that, but at what it meant. She wasn't just staying, she was investing, not in the shop, in him, in them. Clare showed up each day in jeans and a work shirt, hair pulled back, a smudge of sawdust on her cheek like it belonged there. She asked questions, took notes, and when the final beam was set in place, she stood back with her hands in her pockets and didn't say a word, just smiled. That night, Michael walked the floor of the new bay, the scent of fresh wood and oil mingling in the air. It was bigger than he'd imagined, room for more work, more repairs, a future that felt suddenly wide open. He turned to Clare, who leaned in the doorway, watching him the way someone watches a storm finally pass. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she replied. And that was all, because what they were building didn't need a label, it just needed space to grow. The first time Clare took an order at Rosy's diner, she spilled half a pot of coffee and forgot to write down a table's pancake toppings. The regulars were amused, not annoyed. They watched her like she was a puzzle they'd just started to solve. Clare laughed it off, cheeks flushed but smiling in a way that felt lighter than anything she'd worn in her past life. Rosy herself, a stout, no-nonsense woman with a smoker's rasp and a heart of gold, hired her without blinking. "You can carry a tray, and you know how to say please. That's more than most," she'd said. "Besides, the town could use something new to talk about." Clare worked mornings, the shift that started before the sun finished rising, where truckers, teachers, and farmers rolled in half awake and hungry. She wore a borrowed apron and tied her hair back in a messy knot, her only jewelry a hair tie on her wrist. There was something refreshing in the clatter of plates, the sticky syrup bottles, the smell of eggs and burnt toast. Nothing was curated. Nothing was staged. It was just real. She learned names fast. She remembered which regular took his coffee black and which one liked an extra napkin under his plate. She refilled glasses, wiped booths, made mistakes, and laughed through all of them. And slowly, the whispers that once followed her turned into nods, into warmth, into respect. People stopped seeing her as the girl from the headlines. They started seeing her as Clare. After her shift, she'd walk home, no car, no driver, just her boots on the gravel. Sometimes she'd stop by the garage and bring Michael a sandwich, sit on the bench out front, and watch him work. Other days, she'd swing by the school to surprise Emily, joining her for library hour or watching her draw in the cafeteria. The life she was building was stitched together with small, quiet moments. It didn't have chandeliers or chauffeurs, but it had something she never knew she needed. It had roots. And for the first time in her life, Clare wasn't just existing. She was living. The county fair arrived like it always did. Trucks rolling in with rattling trailers, teenagers hanging up string lights between poles, the scent of kettle corn and diesel filling the air before the rides were even fully built. Maple Hollow didn't do big or flashy, but what it did do, it did with heart. Homemade pies, hand-painted signs, and the whole town showing up just to see each other smile. Clare hadn't planned on going. She wasn't sure she'd earned that space yet. Still felt like a guest in a town that was learning to forget the headlines. But when Emily appeared in the doorway, twirling in a sparkly skirt, asking if Clare could come too, she couldn't say no. She didn't own a dress anymore, at least not one suited for hay bales and fiddles, but Sherry from the diner insisted she borrow one. "It's nothing fancy," she said, handing her a soft blue number from a box in her attic, "but it's got a little twirl to it." That night, the fair glowed under the stars. Rows of mason jars lit up the booths. Kids ran wild with sticky fingers, and the Ferris wheel creaked in slow, gentle circles. Clare stood near the edge of the dance floor, unsure, watching couples sway in time to a country song she'd never heard. Then Michael appeared. No suit, no speech, just jeans, a flannel shirt, and that steady look she had come to trust more than anything. He held out his hand without saying a word. She took it. The music wasn't perfect. The beat was slow and easy, the fiddle a little sharp at the edges. But under the string lights, beneath a sky bursting with stars and the scent of funnel cake, Clare let him pull her in close. His hand rested at her waist, her fingers laced with his, and they moved, not gracefully, but with intention, with something better than polish, with truth. People watched, sure, but no one whispered. Because by then, everyone knew what they were seeing. Not a story, not a scandal, but something real, something worth dancing for. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind Maple Hollow did best. The dishes were done, the laundry folded into uneven piles, and Michael was out back, fixing a squeaky hinge on the screen door. Clare sat cross-legged on the living room rug, helping Emily piece together a 1,000-piece puzzle of a sunflower field, though they were still missing the edge pieces and had built most of the middle out of order. Emily, always talkative, had been unusually quiet, her little brow furrowed as she pressed two sky-blue pieces together with the intensity of someone solving the world's problems in cardboard. Then, without looking up, she asked, "Are you my new mom now?" Clare froze. The words landed softly, but their weight hit like thunder. She looked at Emily, really looked, her wide, curious eyes, her tiny hands resting on the puzzle, the sincerity in her voice so open, so unguarded, that it made something catch in Clare's throat. Emily continued, her voice quiet. "You live here now, and you're nice, and Daddy smiles more." Clare blinked fast, her heart racing. She had prepared for a lot. Hard questions, the press, rebuilding her life from scratch, but not this. Not the way Emily said it, like it wasn't a test, but a hope. Like she wasn't asking for perfection, just for something she could call real. Clare reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "I'm not your mom," she said softly, "but I love being here with you, and I love being your friend." Emily tilted her head. "But could you be?" Clare felt the question in her bones. She took a slow breath, then nodded. "If that's something you'd want one day, I think I'd like that too." Emily smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just the kind of smile that settles into the soul and stays there. Then she handed Clare another puzzle piece. "This one looks like it goes in the sun." Clare took it, her fingers brushing Emily's, and placed it carefully into the yellow center. And just like that, the picture began to come together. The letter sat folded on the kitchen table for 3 days before Clare mailed it, not because she didn't know what to say, she had known for weeks, but because putting it on paper made it real, final. The closing of a chapter she had lived most of her life inside, even when it no longer fit. It wasn't long, no flowery language, no carefully constructed diplomacy like the notes her father had raised her to perfect. Just the truth. The kind of truth that didn't beg to be accepted, only spoken. "Dad, you always taught me strength meant control. that to lead was to win, and to win was to sacrifice. I know now that what you really meant was, don't feel, don't waver, don't show them anything they can use against you. I lived that way for a long time. I wore the dress, gave the smiles, walked the rooms full of people who called me admirable without ever knowing who I really was. I did everything right, until I realized I was building a life I didn't recognize. When I left, I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I was tired of pretending, tired of measuring my worth by expectations I never agreed to. You might never understand why I chose this life, why I chose a garage, a diner, a little girl who draws me holding her hand. But it doesn't matter if you do. Because for the first time, I'm not asking you to approve. I'm not asking for permission. I'm just letting you go. And I forgive you for not seeing me, for loving the version of me that made sense on paper. I hope one day, if you ever look past that version, you might see the person I've finally become. I'm happy, Dad. That's the only legacy I want now. Claire. She sealed the envelope, no return address. She didn't wait for a reply, didn't need one, because the letter wasn't for him, not really. It was for her, for the girl who finally let go of a name she didn't need to be whole. The morning the new sign went up, the sky was just beginning to shift from lavender to gold. Michael stood out front, coffee in one hand, wrench in the other, watching as the final bolts were fastened into the wooden frame above the garage door. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. It wasn't flashy, just clean lines, bold lettering, and something that finally felt like it told the truth. Turner and Whitmore Honest Auto, built with trust. Claire had fought him on it at first. She said her name would bring attention, maybe even trouble, that people might come looking, not for oil changes or brake repairs, but for the heiress who disappeared and came back different. But Michael had looked her in the eye and said, "That's not who they'll see here." And he'd been right. In Maple Hollow, names weren't just about legacy, they were about reputation. And by now, everyone in town knew Clare not as a runaway, but as the woman who made pies for school fundraisers, who helped patch leaks in the diner's roof, who rolled up her sleeves and got her hands dirty without ever asking for applause. The day the sign went up, people stopped to take pictures. Some smiled, some nodded. Some even clapped when they thought no one was watching. Rosy brought a thermos of sweet tea to celebrate. Emily beamed like they'd just built a castle. Claire stood beside Michael, eyes on the sign, hands tucked into her back pockets. "You sure?" she asked softly. Michael didn't even look away. "Yeah, we built this together." She smiled, slow, warm, the kind that came from deep in her chest. "I guess we did." Later that afternoon, a new customer pulled into the lot, someone just passing through, their bumper rattling and their GPS confused. They asked if this was the place with the honest mechanic. Michael glanced at Claire, who was under the hood already, sleeves rolled, hands steady. "Yeah," he said, "this is the place." The school gym smelled like crayons, floor wax, and curiosity. A line of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage where a dozen restless kids wiggled in their seats, sneakers squeaking against the tile. It was career day at Maple Hollow Elementary, and everyone had shown up: farmers, firemen, shopkeepers. Emily, now a teenager and taller than Claire had ever expected, sat in the back row near the windows, arms crossed but eyes watching closely. Claire stood at the front, her boots scuffed, sleeves rolled up, a grease stain on her elbow she hadn't noticed until halfway through the morning. She'd been invited as the co-owner of Turner and Whitmore Honest Auto, but when the teacher asked her to share something inspiring, Claire set her notes aside and spoke from somewhere quieter, truer. "I wasn't always a mechanic," she began, hands folded calmly. "I didn't grow up dreaming about spark plugs or busted radiators. I grew up in mansions, eating dinners I couldn't pronounce, surrounded by people who smiled without meaning it." The kids blinked, interested now. "On the day I was supposed to get married, I ran," she said simply. "I left behind a wedding dress, a guest list with 1,000 names, and a future I didn't choose. She paused, letting the silence stretch just enough. I broke down, literally, on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, and I was scared. But someone stopped, a stranger, covered in engine grease, who asked me if I needed help without asking anything else. He didn't care about my name. He cared that I was stuck. The kids leaned in, wide-eyed. I stayed in that town for one night, then two, then forever. Claire looked over at Emily, who smiled without rolling her eyes this time. I found something on that road, not just a man, not just a daughter, not just a business, she smiled. I found something far better than the life I'd left behind. She took a breath and said the words she'd waited years to say aloud. I found a life that finally felt like mine. And for the first time, every kid in that room believed that sometimes getting lost is the only way to be found.